And I think we are, in fact, recording. Nice. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for your time and being here tonight. So what are we doing here? Why are we meeting? How did this whole meeting come to be? What I thought I would do is just tell you a very quick history lesson of how the whole Taste of Healing came to be. And it started in a traffic jam on 95 in Maine 2 summers ago. I was going up to Maine, was stuck in traffic, and I started to, sort of think about things. And I think I might have heard a song that triggered a memory of something loss related, and started thinking about how much loss there is in the world and how people manage it. And as somebody who talks to people in individual sessions or in groups about their loss, I realized it's not for everybody. And so then I started to think, well, I like to do yoga and that helps me feel better and like there's less suffering. And I like music and I like being active physically and I meditate and all these kind of things. I think that, sort of came out as like contributing to helping people manage grief and manage loss. And then the next enlightenment hit when I said, wow, I know people who do all these things. So what if we got everybody together and we had like a fair, like a festival, of all these different ways that people can use to manage grief and loss. And this was at the end of, this was occurring around the end of August. And at the end of August in Boston was the Taste of Boston. The restaurants, all the restaurant groups were having these special events. So I said, well, let's call this a Taste of Healing, and people can come. We'll have a big open house. People can try out yoga. People can try out music. We'll have therapy dogs. We'll have acupuncture treatments that people can have, and people can spend time there and really learn some new ways of getting some help. So we have this event. It's all set. It's scheduled. It's going to be April of 2020. And we know what happened a year ago in March. So it got canceled. It got tabled. And what COVID has done is it's enhanced any grief people have already have, while creating all new sorts of griefs and losses, not just death related, but food insecurity and social injustices and people losing their jobs and losing their homes. So we've just been living in this massive world of grief for 14 months now. But we can't do this thing live. So what can we do? Well, let's try something virtual. And there were some of us in our specialty areas that translate pretty well to virtual. So we went from 10 presenters to 5 or to 6. And we tried something online. We made it open to the public. We had an event in January. All kinds of people came. We had breakout rooms. And so then the question was kind of what's next? And so we thought what was next would be we would grab a group of the presenters again. We'd talk about what we do. We'd bring in a wonderful group of friends and colleagues who might be interested in what we're talking about and would have some questions for us, and just to kind of expand perspective, expand views of ways to manage grief and loss. And so that's how we ended up here this evening with this group. So the hope is, maybe sometime in the fall, maybe sometime in the summer, we'll be able to host a live event, and we will bring back, we have some wonderful people who use music as therapy, people who use energy tapping as therapy for grief and loss, journaling. So at some point we'll have a big event, because as we know, grief does not discriminate. It impacts everybody. We all feel it. And recently we've been feeling it on a daily basis. So what I thought we would do is, between myself and Jen and Marci and Jess and Kathy, we will talk about our specialty areas. how we help support people. And you folks who have been kind enough to join us, you can put questions in the chat, which Chantal will coordinate. You can ask us questions, and maybe we can have just kind of a nice roundtable conversation here. Okay, does that feel all right to folks?
Great.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Would any of Kathy, Jess, Marci, Jen, would you like to lead off? I'm happy to lead off too, but would any of you like to just talk to us? Maybe, you know, within 5 minutes of kind of what you do. I'll go.
Good idea.
I'll go. Okay. And again, this to stay true to our name, this is a taste of healing. This is a taste of healing event. So it's designed to give you a little bit of a lot of different things. And if anybody either with us tonight, or if somebody who is watching this in the future would like more specific information from one of the presenters, please reach out to me at healingforgriefandloss.com. That's my website. You can send me an email and I will connect you to the person you would be interested in speaking with. Okay. So the question I get often when I get inquiries is, do I need grief counseling? So let's kind of look at what grief counseling is. To me, grief counseling, like grief itself, is very individualized. I think if you were to observe 5 different sessions with 5 different people I have, they would all look really different. There isn't sort of a set way to do grief counseling. So what accounts for some of those differences? Some of the differences might be, what was the counselee's relationship to the deceased or to the lost object? What was the cause of death? When did they die? Where are they in their grief process? All of those can be factors in how the grief counseling will go. I have met with people 2 weeks after a sudden traumatic loss, and I've met with people 2 years after a prolonged loss, and vice versa. Some people come into grief counseling looking for grief counseling, excuse me, just trying to get through every day. They're just trying to manage what's in front of them, do what they have to do, whether that's get up every day, pay bills, get to work, take care of their kids. So in those grief counseling areas, we're really looking at building skills and building strategies. So those sessions feel a little more product oriented, if you will. Okay, because we're more defined in kind of what we're trying to do and what we're trying to get out of the experience here. For other people, they might come into grief counseling because they just want to kind of talk through their relationship with the person who's died or the lost object that they are coming in for. And I think once we say things out loud, it becomes real. And then we can start to manage it from a different perspective. So I think in those regards, the grief counseling there looks more like a process. Okay. The way I think of it is in the first scenario where we're building strategies, that's in the acceptance commitment therapy world, that would be considered math mind. There's a problem and we need a solution to the problem. In the second scenario where we're just sort of processing and building perspective, in the ACT world, that would be more sunset mind. We're just taking in different pictures, different views, and having different perspectives. Okay. Some people like individual counseling, and individual counseling works from the inside out. It works on the narrative that you have running in your head about what's going on. Group counseling, of which I do a lot of groups, and they tend to be mixed ages, mixed genders. Group counseling works from the outside in. It's about getting validation, about getting normalized by the group of people that you're with. So depending on where you are in your process of grief, individual or group might be different options. Some people like both. In any event, the pathway out of grief is to go through it. Okay. And when we can make that commitment to truly look at what pains us, then we can start living fully. That's when we start living fully. Okay. In a general picture, when I don't, unless people need that math mind of problem and solution, I don't think of grief counseling as people coming because they have a problem that they need solutions for. I think of it more as people are, excuse me, people are coming because something sad and tragic happened, and they're trying to figure out, what do I do next to go forward? Yes, sometimes it takes on that problem orientation that we need to find some strategies for, but for the most part, it's how do I integrate and take this forward with me? Because we only, suffer over the loss of relationships that mean something. So we can't leave them behind. Okay. So I could continue to go, but I want to try to keep to maybe our 5 minutes, but that's a little overview of more sort of traditional counseling when people come in looking for grief counseling, what it can look like. So.
Awesome. Thanks, Ken.
Yeah. Somebody else?
I'll go.
Yeah.
I don't like silence. My name is Jessica, and I am with the Boston Bulldogs running club. I am in the leadership program, and I'm one of the running coordinators for one of the meetups that we have in Chestnut Hill. The Bulldogs running club is a running club for people who are in recovery from drugs or alcohol, or people who have been affected by people that are addicts or alcoholics. So it's a club inclusive of everybody that is kind of dealing with addiction in one way or another. I personally, I just celebrated 15 years clean on March 29th. So it's been a big part of my life is the recovery part. There's so much grief in addiction. There's the loss of people who have overdosed. There's the loss of people who just aren't in your life anymore because they continue to use even though you stopped using. And then there's really just like a lot of grief that we put on ourselves as addicts, or people who have family members that are addicts, of just the whole situation is grief filled. I've been with the Bulldogs for a little over a year now, but they have been a club for about 5 years, and they've really promoted running for wellness and recovery. We run at all different paces. It's more about the community than it is just of running. The act of running really releases a lot of endorphins. I've been on numerous runs where if I've been anxious or stressed out previous to meeting up with people to run, I'll cry on a run. And it just kind of like releases that. I'll have people around me that I feel safe and connected to, that I can talk about what's going on. And it's always a safe place. So it's been really interesting for me, because I have a hard time sitting with my grief and just talking about it. Like, I am better moving and processing it in that way. And I feel like a lot of people have that, and most people who have addiction or who have been struggling with that also find that the grief and the loss and stuff, it helps to be moving instead of just sitting and trying to process it, because we don't really know how to process it that way. So Boston Bulldogs Running Club, it's been amazing. I can't say enough good things about it. And the nice thing about it is, like I said, any pace, and they promote walking as well. If you are not ready to run, if you don't want to run, we really just want to bring that community together and make sure it feels like a safe place for anybody to go to, just to have different options of having that outlet.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. It's such a nice group camaraderie too.
Yeah, the community it's everything. I started in January 2020 with the running club, because I happened to see them when I was training for Boston, and I saw their sign out saying, you know, running and recovery, and it like blew my mind because I thought all run clubs were out of bars and breweries, because that's all that was in this area. So just having that community and having that safe space was amazing for me. But I joined in 2020, January 2020, and then, you know, COVID hit and the run clubs had to stop, and they were able to continue with Zoom meetups. Even though we weren't running, we would have that safe place to come and like connect once a week, and we would social distance, have very small groups of people that felt comfortable enough running, you know, in public to still keep that connection and that movement and the running going.
The consistency, yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Someone else want to share this?
I'll go next.
Yeah.
So hello, everyone. I'm Kathy Seltzer, and I'm an acupuncturist here in Brookline. I've been practicing for close to 30 years now, and during this time, I do see a lot of people who come in for various kinds of grief, whether it's grief that's come with a shocking experience or something that has been expected for a while, and people are experiencing a lot of anticipatory grief. I see a wide range of things that people come in for, whether it's a loved one, for a pet, for loss of a pet, loss of a job, loss of a relationship. And acupuncture, which I think everyone I'm sure here knows, is the use of very fine, thin needles that I place in different places in people's bodies, is been used for over 2,000 years. And we think of it as, sorry about that, we think of it as the sort of original holistic medicine, because when I'm treating people, I'm treating people on a physical level, an emotional level, a spiritual level, as well as a mental level. And we all know when people are dealing with grief, it puts a lot of stress on their bodies. And so people may reach out to come to me because they're having sleep disturbance after experiencing grief, or they're having trouble concentrating, or it could be that they have a great loss of appetite and they can't digest food. So some people call me because of very physical things, and some people call me because they feel depressed. They're crying all the time, they're stuck. And sometimes it comes from themselves, sometimes it's a referral that comes from a counselor or mental health worker. But I've seen incredible things happen with acupuncture. And part of it that I wanted everyone to know about is that one of the theories that I use in treating people is that we associate different emotions with different organs. And so the two that I concentrate on the most are the lungs and the heart. We say the lungs are the seat of sadness and grief, and the heart is sort of the seat of lack of joy. So those two together create difficulty breathing, a lot of things that happen in the upper chest. And when there's that increased stress on the body, we have increased cortisol, fight or flight happening all the time. And I know people leave acupuncture feeling a sense of better well-being and calm. And so I actually love working with acupuncture with people who are experiencing all kinds of grief. I do a lot of work with the perinatal health community. And so when there's pregnancy loss, that's also a great use for acupuncture. And it's been rewarding for me, and I know helpful for some people.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kathy.
You're welcome.
Marci, Jen?
I can go.
All right, Marci.
But you, unless I beat you, Marci, sorry.
Go ahead, Jen. I'll go after you.
Okay. Well, I'm sitting here taking so many notes because everything my wonderful colleagues have been saying really speaks to me. And I just want to say hello to everybody on the screen. I feel a connection to so many of you from different parts of our journey together. So it's really so wonderful to be here with you all. So I'm Jennifer Wiles, and I'm the director of the HeartPlay program, which is a children's a bereavement program for children, teens, and young adults. And we've been around, this is our 26th year. We operate out of Wayland, Massachusetts, but as with so many of us now, I feel like, you know, my work is kind of all over the world, literally, on Zoom. The tagline is HeartPlay, 25 years leading with the heart. And Kathy, I love what you just said about the different organs and the heart and the lungs too. I just feel like that's so connected to the grief work. So I call our work a heart-centered approach. So in our work with children, teens, and young adults who have experienced the death of somebody important in their lives, we work with the expressive arts. I'm a dance movement therapist and a mental health counselor. So we use a lot of dance and music and movement and visual art, creative writing, poetry, drama, to help people, young people, express and process their feelings of grief. So we run peer support groups, we do individual work. We used to, you know, meet live in person at Ken's place in Newton and also in Wayland. We've been doing all our work on Zoom for the past year. We work in schools. We do groups, go into schools and do grief support there as well, and in community centers. So, you know, people often ask me, wow, working with kids in grief, that must be so sad and so hard. And I usually reply, you know, well, it is those things, but it's also just incredibly hopeful work and inspiring work, because we really try to instill in kids a way to talk about their person, honor their person, and really discover the hope and resiliency and love that's in their hearts to keep going in life. And our basic philosophy, there's just a few foundational beliefs that we stand by. There's no timeline for grief. It's not like, you know, in 6 months, a year, you're over it. There's no getting over it. It's something that you continue to go through your whole life. And once a child is in our program, you know, they can stay as long as they want. There's no like kicking someone out. I've had people who are now in their 20s who started with me when they were 5 years old. So it's kind of a switch in the philosophy of, you should be over this by now. It's more like, we're going to walk this journey together for as long as you want to walk it with us. Everyone grieves in their own way. That's another thing that we've really discovered. Each person's different and each person expresses themselves differently. We also really believe that no young person or anybody should have to grieve alone. We really believe in this peer support model and mentoring model, where we have kids as they get older mentor the younger participants. So we're all kind of working together and all really about community building. And being, as I said, a dance movement therapist and an expressive arts therapist, I really believe in the power of the arts to give voice to so many things that we hold in our heart that are sometimes hard to just talk about. Like Jess said, you know, sometimes it's really hard to just sit and talk about things. It's, you know, we're moving, we're creating ways to keep that conversation going. Something Ken said too, just reminded me of the trauma-informed piece of what we do. And, you know, people will come to me too and say, I think, you know, we need grief counseling, grief therapy. And I say to a lot of families, you know, there's really nothing wrong with you. Something wrong happened to you. And there's a big difference there, right? That I really feel we use a kid's strengths to help them navigate this new journey. And what I've really noticed is that many young people discover this incredible capacity in themselves for compassion, for empathy, for, you know, connecting with other people, for realizing parts of themselves they never knew existed. And it kind of changes the course of their lives. So I call that my silver lining project, where we kind of discover the strengths in us through such hardship and challenge and heartbreak. I also run Camp Air in Boston, which some of you know about very well. A lot of you on the screen have helped me with that over the years. So that's a bereavement camp for kids ages 6 to 17. And hopefully, oh yes, thanks Chantal, put that on the website on the chat. So you can find out more about that. And I think that's everything. Oh, I can just say my latest initiatives, since it includes somebody on the screen, really expanding the language of grief. And this is the time to do that. So I've been doing work with the local Autism Alliance to help people without a voice really find a voice in grief. And Julie and I have been doing a project with pet loss, which has been really incredible and really inspired. Someone else Kathy mentioned pet loss. We're really finding that has such an effect on kids and people. So kind of just exploring areas where people may be marginalized by the grieving process and how we can support them in their journey. So I think that's my 5 minutes. I could obviously go on all night, but I'll stop.
All could go for the entire time. Yeah.
What's that?
I said we all could go for the entire time.
That's right.
You know?
That's right.
It's hard to distill it down to a few minutes. So thank you. Thank you. Marci.
All right. Well, my name is Marci Zeiff, and I'm founder of Creating Calm. And I'm really happy to be here with everybody, with these amazing practitioners. And thank you, Ken, for putting this together, and for all of you coming today to listen to what we have to say and ask your questions. So I embarked on my own personal journey for healing about 25 years ago and found shamanism as a way of healing. And that led to meditation, and that also led to Reiki. And things changed for me so dramatically that I decided that it was something really that I had to share with others, that I just couldn't keep it to myself. I wanted others to benefit as well. So in 2007, I founded Creating Calm. And originally it started for just children, and it grew to families, adults, those with special needs. I went into school systems and park and recreation departments. And really what I provide is meditation, mindfulness, Reiki, which is energy healing, and shamanic practices, which is Native American healing. And meditation and mindfulness helps you to have an inner calm and balance. It enhances your focus. I work with a lot of people with grief and loss, stress and anxiety, just to help people find inner calm through these varieties of methods. Reiki is a form of energy healing. It balances you in body, mind, and spirit. And fortunately, I've been able to switch everything for the past year to online. I meet with people in person typically for groups and private sessions, but everything went online for the past year. It's been going great. And shamanism, which is a connection to the earth and nature, and finding out different ways to find your inner strength and be guided, learning more about yourself through being in nature. And connecting with spirituality. And I recently collaborated with a therapist, and we're doing a healing and processing grief 8-week group therapy, where we're doing some talk therapy and also introducing people to all of these healing modalities that I have to offer. And it's been going really well to combine those things together. Yes, there's my website. Thank you, creating-calm.com. And people can join one group class or go for private sessions and just kind of build their own way of healing and empowerment for them. Mm-hmm. So I think that's everything.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And I mean, so much overlap and commonalities between what we've all been talking about. And I think another one too is that, like, there isn't a time limit for this. Like, grief will wait for you. whenever you want to go get it, it'll wait for you. And whether it's a slow immersion or a deep dive or a structured program or something free flowing, we're all individuals. Grief is all individual. You know, it means different things to different people. So there's options. No one should have to suffer for too long. You know, sometimes, I don't know if you guys have had this experience, and then want to get to some questions. Sometimes people will, you know, maybe stop coming because they feel worse, you know, and sometimes that's because you're really doing the important work that you need to do, to kind of work your way through it, because the way out is through. So, but it'll wait for you. But just curious for either some of us who shared what we do, or certainly the group that's been sitting listening, what are you thinking about? What questions might you have? What has kind of come up for you as we've been sitting here? Yeah, Doug.
So thank you for putting this together. Likewise, I was scratching down a lot of notes, realizing that the glare off my head was probably shining on the screen as I was doing so. But you know, it's interesting. Part of what everybody's talking about is kind of recognized grief. I know I have grief. I know I'm grieving. I'm just curious kind of what the different perspectives are on people that are experiencing grief, but may not realize it, may not even have named it, may not think that grief exists outside of the death of a loved one, but can exist in many different environments. I'm just kind of curious how that kind of gets named and validated.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, you know, there's a lot of psychoeducation we do around loss. And I mean, the loss of, you know, think about if you lost your job and had to uproot your family and move somewhere else to kind of start over again, how impactful and powerful that loss might be that never gets recognized. But if you had a third cousin who you barely knew who died, you might get a few days off of work. You know, so I think, speaking for myself, and I think maybe for the group too, is part of what we do is really trumpet the range of what loss can look like. And that I was talking to this young man, a counselor, a young man I've been counseling, and he was talking about a lot of things that was going on with him, and it was like identity and just all sorts of stuff happening, and he couldn't like describe it. And I said, well, what if you called it grief? And he's like, oh, but I didn't die. Nobody died. I'm like, yeah, but what you're talking about is all sort of responses that people have when they're grieving too. You know? So I think part of it, you know, speaking for myself, I'm curious about you folks, is like doing a piece of education as well.
A similar thought came up for me as well when I was listening, just sort of about what does grief look like when there's not a death, and how in this society it's not, you know, validated in the same way, and we aren't expected to behave the same way. Like, for example, I've worked with a family with a child who was transgender, and what was that change like for them? What was that change like for the parents? And in some ways, that is supposed to be viewed as like something celebratory. Someone really gets to be themselves, and meanwhile, parents are like grieving this whole idea of what they thought their child's life would be like. So I think wondering too, like, how could something like that be sort of plugged into Reiki or acupuncture in like a family model, was what I was thinking about.
And Jess, you were going to say something before too?
No, I was just going to say, because like I don't have the background of some of the other speakers, but just from like a recovery standpoint, every year on coming up to my anniversary, and I've heard it from other people too, I get what we call it PMS, pre-medallion syndrome. And it's like I almost go through like the PTSD or the grief from what had happened when I got clean, like the life that I was in, the feelings that I went through, even though it's like so many years back. It's like it's like reliving the grief again. But you don't think about it as grief. We've never really talked about it that way before. It's definitely something I've always dealt with. And when it came up, I always talk about it so that I can like let it out and not keep it in. But I'm also curious as how we broach that topic without being like someone died. So this is a good topic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that question so much, Doug. I think for me, as this project of expanding the language of grief, I feel like as hard as these times are, grief is something that's kind of on everyone's mind right now. And I feel like more and more people are saying the word and expanding what they think of as grief. Like, we always think, oh, somebody died, but now we're all starting to reflect on the many losses that we're all experiencing. And I can tell you, like, as a clinician running I run this group at the Autism Alliance for caregivers of someone on the autism spectrum. And we're doing this group through the lens of grief. And that's what I'm starting to do now in my work. Like, let's look at things through this lens of grief. Even if no one has died, let's reflect on our experiences and how we might look at it as losses, what we have lost and how we have dealt with those losses. So like Annie was saying about the family she's working with, to recognize all the parts of an experience like that, of having a transgender child, and in this case of raising someone on the autism spectrum, and not just focusing on, oh, it was hard, getting that IEP or getting the right, OT for my child. It's more like, wow, that was really hard for me when all my friends' kids, got their driver's license or graduated from high school or had, went to the prom, all those things that were so hard for them. They never looked at it through the lens of grief. But when you look at it that way, it's like, wow, that's incredible. That's loss. And that's something I've never grieved, and very powerful. Thanks for letting me share that example. But I think we're all expanding our view of what grief can be.
Yeah. That made me think about, patients that I have that are caregivers, maybe to a spouse who has Alzheimer's, people who are actively, having to deal on a day-to-day basis with the loss of the person they knew to a disease that's taking over their loved one, and knowing that they can have some peace, kind of like what Marci does in coming to acupuncture for a session and realizing, okay, this is helping me on my journey because it's not something that's going to be over. It's a process of what I'm going through. And that what I do, and I do a lot of education for people who are willing to know about what I'm doing, that their heart can feel more peaceful and that their lungs can also be strengthened so that their immune system isn't falling apart while they're in the process of caring for somebody who's maybe passing or having a chronic illness that's going to take them, or whether I've also had patients who've moved here and they're trying to, figure out getting new care while they had to uproot from the West Coast. And there's a whole bunch of grief of having had to leave their whole life. So I do think that, there are different ways of thinking about grief and helping people process it.
Yeah.
I wanted to add something to that, and in some ways it's a counter idea, not necessarily idea, but another sort of way we approach grief. Does anybody watch The Expanse, the show that was on Sci-Fi? Okay.
Really?
Amazing show, very dark, but if you like dark sci-fi, it's great. There was a quote from it in the show this year with a character who had been through, everybody's been through a lot of trauma in the show, and this one character sat back and when was confronted with, why aren't you sad? Why is this not upsetting you? She replied by saying, no matter how traumatic the loss is, you only have so much emotional stamina. Even grief can get used up. And it was just, I was floored, like just like, wow, okay. And so as we sort of talk about grief and talk about, you know, creating in counseling and creating a sense of hope for people who feel so awash in it, you know, I love what you were saying, Ken, about, you know, you have to go through it. Part of, I think, at least when I'm talking to people about grief and talking about moving through it, is, you know, it's not a race, and certainly there isn't a timeline. However, there is often an end, or at least an end to this chapter. And it is about consuming it. It is about using up our emotional stamina. And at some point we tire of grieving. We are finished with that process. And I'm sort of curious if people have reflections, or other, you know, those of you who are grief workers have a sort of experience with that, and watching clients or patients get to that moment. Or even how you kind of coach somebody in the process of saying, there is, you know, you can take 20 years to do this. You can take your whole lifetime if you want. That maybe you might have some incredible emotional stamina that allows you to live in this state. However, there is this opportunity to use it up. And I just found it to be such a useful, in some ways, framework to think about grief through that lens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think about, just in my experience, is that, and, you know, as you were saying that, Chris, I was thinking about this young girl. I started to work with her when she was 6 years old, and her father died. And I still see her every now and then, and she's 23. Like, your story means different things to you at different points. And we went from meeting every week to meeting every other week to meeting once a month to meeting every now and then to meeting what I call like the 3,000-mile oil change, you know, like comes in like once a year sometimes, just because I know her story, and the loss of her father at age 6 and the loss of her father at age 23. She still lost her father, but the story means something different. And there's been moving forward motions within those, you know, what's the math, 17 years or so, you know? So I think you can move in and move out of it. And I think to use a Bulldog statement, Jessica, is like when you can be transparent about your feeling and how you're feeling. Like, I'm just not doing this anymore right now. You know, I'm done with this right now. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's honesty, right?
And I do like that idea that I can return to it. It's okay to put your grief on pause, and because you may have consumed it, but that if it comes back, like what Jess was saying, you know, there's an anniversary sometimes, and it's okay, but it's also in some way something to look forward to, knowing that, you know, it's familiar, but you move through it again.
Yeah.
So Chris, what I heard from that also was just an opportunity to not pathologize those that aren't grieving.
Yes.
And give them the space to be able to not be in grief, even if others expect them to be, or if other people experiencing the same situation are, that they're allowed to not be in grief.
Right.
Yes, and I think that was the takeaway, because this person in the show, in the narrative, was in some ways being guilt tripped for not being upset. Like, you should be torn apart. You should be so upset. And it's like, you don't know what I've been through already. You don't know my capacity to handle this. And we all have a different experience with that. So yeah, it is empowering.
And I think permission to have a range of feelings too. Like, a feeling I always introduce is, do you feel relieved? You know, if it was like a long, prolonged illness, you know, something of that nature, like you can feel relieved. It doesn't mean you care any less, but maybe having a range of emotion is what's best.
Yeah.
Here.
Right. And shifting,
Yeah, go ahead, Marci.
shifting perspective is what comes to mind with me, that at different points in time in your life, your perspective is a little bit different.
Right.
And using all of these techniques, acupuncture and therapy and meditation, can help move that along. in
Mhm.
different ways.
Yeah. I think that's, to me, the beauty of having joined this group of people is to see, even watching you, Jen, do some body movement when we did the thing in January, the going backwards and forwards. I was like, oh, I'm going to use that if she's okay with that. Just because people need different ways of expressing themselves and moving through things. No two people are the same, and different things work for different people. So giving people options, I think, is really valuable.
Right.
I do too. And I think, in the past, maybe a generation ago, we thought of grief as a very linear process, right? There were like these, the Kubler-Ross stuff, like the stages of grief. And you go from one, check it off, go to the next. Okay, check. I'm out of denial. I'm going to the next one. But I just so much love the circle image rather than a straight line, because life doesn't work like that. We kind of circle back, like people were saying, the anniversary happens and maybe we're taken back to that time again. Your birthday, different life events, like I mentioned, graduations, weddings, births, other deaths in the family, all these things will, bring us back to that point. And I just wanted to say too about that, kind of taking like a break from it too. Sometimes I think it's good for me, like when I'm working with kids, to kind of give them permission to take a vacation from the grief. Like you can just take a break from it for a little bit. Doesn't mean you don't care. It doesn't mean that you're not hurting, but just give yourself a little break. And the other thing that I like to do is instill hope. Not that I like to do it, I do it. I instill hope. Like right now, in the very beginning, every breath I'm taking hurts. It hurts me to breathe. Every breath hurts. But I want to say to people as well, I promise you at some point, you'll be able to take a breath again and it won't hurt.
Mhm.
To instill that hope that you will get there, I promise you. And I'm going to walk with you on this journey.
Yeah.
I think hope is really important to know, like this moment right now, it's not going to be like this forever.
Yeah. And that people aren't alone. I think that was a really good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love how all of you do such different things, because I think it's wonderful, and it shows how people deal with grief in different ways, what everyone is talking about, how there's so many different reactions to it, which I think that there is still definitely work to be done around people accepting that, and even people within the same family reacting to things in different ways and having different just experiences with it. Even if it's the same person, it's different for each person, like who was maybe a sibling or a friend, or like you've all had different relationships, so you're going to have to deal with that in different ways. I think that's just so important, and also empowering in a way that it's like there's not just one way to handle this maybe traumatic experience. And I personally work in a school, so I've been thinking about, working with Ken, I just feel like I've taken on a grief lens, especially this year, and just working in a high school, about like for my seniors who graduated last year, like everything that they missed, and we almost didn't have a graduation and they didn't have a prom. And I'm thinking about my current sophomores who left school their freshman year and now are coming back as juniors. I'm like, what is that? And I'm just wondering like what you guys think about like how to encourage people to kind of take on this grief lens in this crazy world that we're living in right now through a pandemic, and like how do we encourage kind of, I don't know, like grief strategies almost when not a lot of people are viewing it in a grief lens. Like how do we encourage that, and like what are other things that we can be saying, and how can I be encouraging kids to kind of use some of these resources and healthy strategies?
Yeah.
Some of what I think of too when we're talking about a grief lens is what I think couples that, which is compassion, self-compassion, compassion for other people, and acceptance. And I think those words might land a little differently when you say them to someone versus saying something like grief or grief counseling or loss, because one set, I think, has a connotation that's very empowering and the other has more of a negative connotation, but I sort of view them as the same in essence.
Yeah. And, you know, one of the concerns that I have, and it's been really prevalent and relevant, I think, in this past year, has been the sort of the opposite, which is toxic positivity. If you've heard the term, if you're familiar with the term, that like we just like wash over anything painful. Yeah, but you know, and I was thinking like when you were talking, Jessica, before about like, yeah, this is like painful for me. Yeah, but don't you feel so much better? Like we don't give the permission to like just sit with the hard stuff for a while, because we live in this crazy American culture that says a good life is a painful life. So we need to like gloss over anything that's painful and just accentuate the positives, the positives, the positives. Well, you can do both, you know? And I think in the positions we're in where we can influence people, it's kind of on us to do both, you know? The kind of yes ands instead of the yes buts, you know?
And honoring the process, honoring the loss, honoring,
Yeah.
just being with it.
Yeah. Yeah, right now it sucks. So
I just kind of wanted to say, I'm somebody who I consider myself really lucky. Like I've never had that capital G kind of like grief or loss or traumatic experience in my life. But I'm somebody who I think is really sensitive, obviously kind of being in the counseling field. But kind of part of my own work when I was in high school, I've always really like wanted to be like a famous musician. And so part of that was kind of like this fantasy of what my life would be like. And, all those kinds of things about attention and money and whatever you would expect is kind of what I was hoping my life would be. And I got kind of into this field and I remember kind of being like, oh, like I'm gonna be a grown-up now. And I'm gonna put that to the side. And I was talking with someone and they were basically like, you kind of have to also imagine this like giant like handicap that you kind of now have got to kind of reconcile with and don't forget about it. And it was the most validating experience because I kind of felt like no one really can get it. No one can really kind of put it to a way because it was kind of framed as, that world or that fantasy is gone or it's there or it's, you're still young or this or that. And I kind of it was such a really refreshing way because I know that we kind of talked earlier about validation and how that might be kind of, part of this process. But I think once you kind of have somebody take it as seriously as you kind of internally kind of wish it was taken, there's some real room to breathe. So I know obviously everyone probably deals with grief and works with others, but as the recipient of someone who has had some pretty nice moments of validation, in many different ways, with that, it's very nice to have.
Great. Yeah. The parameters of, lost visions, lost dreams.
Yeah.
They count. They count. It's not a contest, but they count. So, other thoughts people have, other questions, other comments, anything that got sort of stirred up for them as we're closing in on our 8 o'clock hour.
One thing I can add to myself, I know we're just sort of all this interesting collection. Jess invited me. I'm so glad she did. This has just been fantastic. And I'm going to be following up on a lot of your links in the side. I'm going to add one more. I changed my title of who I was once I sort of got a sense of what this group was about.
I realized that after I invited you about the color motion.
Yeah, so I've been part of a very long-standing running. Jess knows about this. She's actually worked on some of these pieces with me as an art project, collaborative art project, a digital art project with an artist who I met when she turned 70 and released a DVD of essentially about an hour and a half of what she called a healing digital art. And it was, she had done 1,000 watercolor paintings and scanned them all and cast them to 10 songs, and actually takes you through a very kind of open-eyed meditative journey with them. And so I went to the opening of that show and was just blown away. And over the last 10 years, she and I and a bunch of collaborators internationally have actually been working and making digital art that is intended to calm and kind of recenter people in a way of being able to do that with their eyes open, their ears open, not say a yoga meditation, but imagine being able to do that and arrive in that kind of same state with your eyes open. And where you might find healing in public spaces where TVs and other places are that can carry that kind of material. What's interesting is the biggest reception we've had for this work is in the death and dying community. It's in people who are in hospice, their families, and not just while they're going through that process, but then the after, basically people who've been through it and now they still are with this artwork that took them through that journey. And so they have this sort of memorial that helps them through the grieving process, even after the experience. We do license the work in hospitals, but we've actually had a real struggle sort of marketing it. We're not marketers, we're artists. And so I'm always looking for new groups that would be interested in collaborations and looking at the work and using the work in their own practices. So it's feel free to check it out. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to talk to me. But we are continuing, and in fact, just 2 nights ago, talking about really reaching into the hospice community and figuring out ways that we can connect with that group more, because there's so much grief and trauma and healing that happens in that space. And we actually have something we believe is very applicable in it. And the testimonials we've had from people who've experienced the work in that context it's nothing shy of amazing. So
Wonderful.
thank you for, again, inviting me. It's been, all of this is so contextualized and spend a significant amount of time, my free time on this project, and it has been going for over a decade.
And all this, like everything you're doing there, Chris, everything we've done just by showing up tonight is making a difference, because this is what we're putting out in the world. This is the community we're building to help share strengths and honor sadness and ways to, I always think of the 2 words that come to mind are reduce suffering, and if we're doing that, then we're doing some great stuff. So
I definitely want to know when your next conference is.
okay.
Next event.
We're hoping to do something maybe in June. I mean, the fantasy would be to have it be outdoors somewhere. But we'll definitely, we'll be doing more, because this is for me, like, this is very empowering, and this is exciting for me to then go forth and share what I've learned from all you folks. And it's just, this is a time we need it, because, COVID and the bereaved have the same 2 dates on the calendar, before and since. And, before the loss and since the loss. And COVID is the same way. And we're sort of getting into this new re-engagement of the world where we're getting some freedoms, but it also means we're going to have to let go of some systems that have kept us contained for the last 14 months. So I think more than ever, we need the power of group, to kind of keep spreading the good word that we're not all in the same boat, but we're in the same storm. So, because we got different boats.
What do you all do as grief providers to keep yourself in check in terms of your own grief, in terms of managing, holding space for other people's grief?
Somebody?
Good question.
Good question, Annie.
It is. I go to other healers and other counselors and acupuncturists, and now I know all of these people, so I'll be going to all of you. So definitely keeping yourself balanced by doing all the things that you provide for other people.
I on the running side of things, I recently, so through COVID, it's been really hard, and I wanted to make sure no one ever felt left out or isolated. So I made it a big point when the clubs had shut down to reach out to multiple people and coordinate runs. And then once the Bulldogs themselves opened back up, I stepped back and planned my own runs. And the people that I used to meet with were like, well, why aren't you telling me you're running anymore? And I had to be just really clear and transparent and where I was, I'm like, I just need a little bit of time for myself to not worry about anybody else, but there's this safe place for you to still go to. And now I'm going to take some time to deal with what I need to deal with. And it was really eye-opening for me. So I'm glad you brought that up too, because I tend to, I think a lot of us probably do, but I tend to take in everybody else's pain or grief or whatnot, and then I have nothing left for myself. So recognizing that I needed that for myself was actually a huge step that felt great.
Yeah.
I agree with Marci that I have to have a very clear, yoga practice myself. I start my morning before I go to the office by doing a certain healing thing so that I feel like I'm protected before I go deal with everybody, and make sure I get acupuncture and body work and counseling as well. And talk to people.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I need to move a lot. So I dance. That really helps me feel grounded and centered. And also I talk with people too. Like for me, like the peer support with colleagues who understand, who get it, like what it's like to do this work, to me, really, it grounds me and keeps me centered. And so grateful for that. To me, I feel like if I'm connected with other people in the work, it really, really helps. And Annie, I loved your question and your comment about self-compassion. To me, that just that whole field and that whole way of thinking has really helped me a lot too.
Yeah. And I think it's and maybe this is a wrap up because I want to be mindful of people's time, is that for me, it's so important to stay connected to people. And to stay connected to different people too. I have my Bulldog meditation group on Thursday morning. I have my boxing gym people on Wednesday. I have my friends who I share a lot of things with, and I have my friends I can just be a goof with. And, and to stay active, physically active, and also mentally with daily meditations, and trying to keep that, somebody else said too, just trying to keep it balanced. And not too much of something or not, because I think that's how we grieve sometimes behaviorally, is like too much or not enough. So try to find the middle ground somewhere too. And, just the hopeful part, Jen, of like, it'll work out. I don't know how, but it'll work out somehow, the belief, the faith in it. And I think if we keep talking, we figure out whatever we talk about. We figure out whatever we articulate and make transparent. It's the stuff that we don't, that gets deeper and deeper, that becomes much bigger. So I always say, if you're going to ask me how I'm doing, make sure you really want to know.
I also, before we end, want to say something about dealing with grief on a spiritual and religious level. that
Yeah.
no one's really mentioned, but I think that's another thing that I bring to my patients, as well as the ability to talk about it. And I see that with people. I see that with my own grief journey, and reach out to people who can help with the grief process in a spiritual way as well.
Right. Wonderful. Yeah, that was the one plan, because grief hits physically, cognitively, behaviorally, emotionally, and spiritually. It shows up somewhere, and sometimes it shows up in all 5 of them. So I'm glad you brought that up, Kathy. Anyway, many thanks, much gratitude to everyone for giving up your time tonight, being here, being part of this. Much appreciation. So let's go forth with some self-compassion.
Great.
Let's do that. Okay. Be well, everybody.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you all for coming.